Zionism was born as an answer to persecution, but became a project of domination. From Herzl's dream to Gaza's nightmare, this is Zionism, settler colonialism in action. By the late 19th century, Europe was in turmoil. Empires stretched across the globe, carving up Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. At the same time, anti-Semitism was deeply entrenched. In Eastern Europe, Jews faced violence on a mass scale. In 1881, after the assassination of Tsar Alexander II, mobs swept through the Pale of Settlement. Entire Jewish neighborhoods in Kyiv, Odessa, and Warsaw were attacked. In Kishinev, 1903, a three-day pogrom left 49 Jews dead, 500 injured, and thousands of homes destroyed. A second wave in 1905 killed nearly 20 more. These pogroms weren't just tolerated, they were often incited by local officials. Across 4 decades, nearly 2 million Jews fled Eastern Europe for the United States. In the West, anti-Semitism was more subtle, but just as lethal. In France, the Dreyfus Affair of the 1890s exposed the limits of Jewish assimilation. Captain Alfred Dreyfus, one of the few Jews in the French army, was falsely accused of treason. Crowds in Paris screamed, "Death to Jews." This was the world Theodor Herzl inhabited. Born in Budapest in 1860, working as a journalist in Vienna and Paris, he concluded emancipation had failed. Jews would never be safe as minorities. His solution? Sovereignty. In 1896, Herzl published Der Judenstaat, the Jewish State. Herzl's words revealed a colonial mindset.
In Basel, I founded the Jewish state. Perhaps in 5 years, and certainly in 50, everyone will recognize it.
At the Basel Congress in 1897, Herzl declared,
"We should form a portion of the rampart of Europe against Asia, an outpost of civilization as opposed to barbarism."
Where would the state be? Argentina, Uganda, Palestine? Over time, Zionist leaders fused the biblical myth of the Promised Land with modern settler logic. The slogan spread,
"A land without a people, for a people without a land."
But Palestine was not empty. Its people were rendered invisible in the narrative, obstacles to be removed. The seed of Zionism was planted, an ideology born from persecution, nurtured by colonial logic, and sanctified by biblical promise. In 1917, the British Empire stood at its height. Palestine, still under Ottoman control, was vital to its wartime ambitions. A gateway to India, a safeguard for the Suez Canal, and a wedge against German and Ottoman power. At the same time, anti-Semitism was alive in Britain itself. Arthur Balfour, then Foreign Secretary, had already sponsored the 1905 Aliens Act, Britain's first modern immigration law designed specifically to restrict the entry of Jewish refugees fleeing pogroms in Eastern Europe. Balfour saw Jews as a problem population in Europe. For him, Zionism offered a convenient solution: relocate Jews to Palestine and strengthen Britain's foothold in the Middle East at the same time. The Balfour Declaration masked this intent in polished words.
His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people.
But Balfour was candid in private. In 1919, he wrote,
Zionism, be it right or wrong, good or bad, is rooted in age-long traditions of far profounder import than the desires and prejudices of the 700,000 Arabs who now inhabit that ancient land.
This wasn't sympathy, it was displacement. Anti-Semitism at home transformed into colonialism abroad. Winston Churchill, a few years later, stripped away any illusion. In 1937, he said,
I do not admit that the dog in the manger has the final right to the manger, even though he may have lain there for a very long time. I do not admit that a great wrong has been done to the Red Indians of America or the black people of Australia. I do not admit that wrong has been done to these people by the fact that a stronger race has come in and taken their place.
This was the imperial mindset. Zionism was useful. It relocated unwanted Jews. It entrenched British power, and it aligned perfectly with the age of settler colonialism. During the Mandate, Britain facilitated Jewish immigration, the establishment of Zionist institutions, and armed militias like the Haganah. At the same time, Britain crushed Palestinian resistance, especially the revolt of 1936 to 1939, when thousands were killed and entire villages were demolished. By 1947, Britain had set the stage. An organized settler society, militarized and prepared, and an indigenous population fragmented, suppressed, and betrayed. The Holocaust was the most devastating anti-Semitic atrocity in history. 6 million Jews murdered across ghettos, shootings, and extermination camps. For Zionist leaders, it was both vindication and acceleration. Herzl's prediction seemed fulfilled. Jews could not survive as minorities. But the path Zionism took was not only about refuge, it was shaped by collaboration with European powers who saw Palestine as a convenient dumping ground for a people they did not want. Even before the war began, Britain's 1939 White Paper limited Jewish entry to Palestine to just 75,000, shutting the gates at the moment of greatest peril. For most Jews, the world was closed. Ships like the St. Louis were turned away from American shores. Their passengers sent back to Europe to die. And shockingly, in 1933, the very year Hitler came to power, elements within the Zionist movement negotiated directly with Nazi officials. The Havara Transfer Agreement was signed between the German government, the German Zionist Federation, and the Jewish Agency. The arrangement allowed German Jews to emigrate to Palestine and transfer part of their assets. The mechanism was unusual. Funds were deposited in German banks and then used to buy German manufactured goods, which were exported to Palestine. There, the immigrants could collect the value in goods or cash equivalent. As the Yad Vashem Holocaust Encyclopedia explains,
the transfer agreement enabled Jews emigrating from Germany to Palestine to transfer some of their property in the form of German export goods.
Historian Francis Nicosia estimates that around 60,000 German Jews emigrated through this route between 1933 and 1939, channeling tens of millions of Reichsmarks worth of goods into the Yishuv, strengthening both Nazi Germany's economy and the Zionist project in Palestine. But the agreement was deeply divisive. Jewish communities abroad were organizing boycotts of German goods, trying to isolate the Nazi regime. The Havara Agreement undermined that boycott. As Yad Vashem notes,
The agreement was highly controversial, breaking the United Jewish Front against Nazi Germany.
David Ben-Gurion made the priorities clear in 1938.
If I knew it was possible to save all the children of Germany by bringing them to England, and only half by transporting them to Eretz Israel, I would choose the second. For before us lies not only the numbers of these children, but the historical reckoning of the people of Israel.
This was the cold calculus. Rescue was subordinated to statehood. After the war, the plight of Holocaust survivors was weaponized to rally sympathy for Zionism. In 1947, the SS Exodus carried over 4,500 survivors toward Palestine. British forces intercepted it and sent them back to Germany. Images of skeletal survivors dragged off ships shocked the world. Zionist leaders seized this moment. Ben-Gurion declared,
What is inconceivable in normal times is possible in revolutionary times.
the Holocaust became the ultimate justification. If the world would not accept Jews, then Jews must take Palestine. But Europe's anti-Semitism was not erased, it was displaced. Instead of integrating Jewish survivors into Europe or America, the powers of the world endorsed their resettlement in Palestine, transforming Jewish tragedy into Palestinian dispossession. The Holocaust was a crime against humanity. But in its aftermath, Europe's collaboration with Zionism ensured that the cost of that crime would be paid not by Europe, but by the people of Palestine. In 1947, the UN proposed partition. Jews, 1/3 of the population, were given 55% of the land. Palestinians, 2/3 of the people, the rest. Plan Dalet was prepared, a blueprint for expulsion. In April 1948, at Deir Yassin, over 100 villages were massacred, spreading terror across Palestine. By May, Israel declared independence. By year's end, more than 750,000 Palestinians had been expelled or fled, over 500 villages destroyed. David Ben-Gurion admitted it plainly.
We must do everything to ensure they never return. The old will die, and the young will forget.
For Palestinians, this was the Nakba, the catastrophe. Not a one-time tragedy, but a continuing process. After 1948, supremacy wasn't just practiced, it was legislated. Law became the scaffolding of apartheid. The Absentees Property Law of 1950 seized millions of dunams of Palestinian land. Refugees who had fled violence or were even temporarily absent were classified as absentees, their homes handed to Jewish immigrants. The Law of Return, 1950, gave every Jew worldwide an automatic right to immigrate and claim citizenship. In contrast, the Citizenship Law of 1952 barred Palestinian refugees from returning to their own homes. Inside Israel, Palestinians lived under military rule until 1966, requiring permits to travel, work, or even harvest their fields. Even after military rule ended, new laws entrenched inequality. Planning and building laws concentrated land for Jewish towns, while unrecognized Palestinian villages were denied electricity, water, or schools. Admissions Committee Law 2011 allowed Jewish communities to reject Palestinian citizens on grounds of social suitability. Nakba Law 2011 cut funding to institutions commemorating the Palestinian catastrophe. And in 2018, the nation-state law declared
The right to exercise national self-determination is unique to the Jewish people.
Arabic was downgraded from an official language to merely special status. In the West Bank, military order confiscated land, established settlements, and subjugated Palestinians to one set of laws while Israeli settlers lived under civilian Israeli law. Two systems in the same territory. As the rights group Adallah has documented, more than 65 Israeli laws discriminate against Palestinians in citizenship, land ownership, political participation, and culture. This is the structure of apartheid, not just in Gaza or in the West Bank, but in the laws of the state itself. Israel expanded through war. 1956 Suez invasion. 1967 Six-Day War. Occupation of West Bank, Gaza, East Jerusalem, Sinai, and Golan. Menachem Begin later admitted,
"We must be honest. The entire country is ours. Both sides of the Jordan."
1973 Yom Kippur War. 1982 Lebanon invasion, Sabra and Shatila massacre. 1987 First Intifada, stones against rifles. 2002 Second Intifada, Jenin siege. 2006 Lebanon war. 2008, 2012, 2014, 2021, 2023. Gaza bombarded again and again. Neighborhoods flattened, thousands killed.
We shall create a Jewish majority in as much of Palestine as possible.
Between wars, the system hardens. Settlements fragment the West Bank. A wall snakes across villages, condemned by the ICJ as illegal. Checkpoints, demolitions, administrative detention. And in Gaza, a blockade so tight it strangles life itself. Ze'ev Jabotinsky, founder of revisionist Zionism, said it openly in 1923.
Every indigenous people will resist colonists. That is natural. Colonization must either stop or proceed in defiance, with force.
The world has words for this: apartheid, crimes against humanity, genocide. In September 2025, the UN's Independent Commission of Inquiry concluded there are reasonable grounds to believe Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. Killing, serious bodily harm, destroying life conditions, preventing births. The International Association of Genocide Scholars declared the same. Israel's conduct amounts to war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. Earlier UN reports had already warned of genocidal acts in attacks on maternity wards and IVF clinics. As Amnesty International wrote,
Israel is perpetrating the crime of apartheid against Palestinians. The roots of this system lie in decades of land seizures, dispossession, and displacement.
the verdict is clear, politically, morally, and legally. Zionism could not have endured without empire, first the British and then the Americans. In 1948, the United States was the first country to recognize Israel. President Truman announced it just 11 minutes after Israel's declaration of independence. At the time, the relationship was tentative. Many in Washington feared alienating Arab oil producers. But Zionist lobbying, Christian Zionist networks, and Cold War calculations soon shifted the balance. The turning point came after the Six-Day War. Israel's lightning victory over Arab armies impressed US policymakers. Israel was now seen as a reliable strategic asset in the Middle East, a bulwark against Soviet influence. From then on, US military and economic aid skyrocketed. Since the 1960s, the United States has provided Israel with more than $150 billion in aid, most of it military. Israel receives over $3.8 billion annually under a 10-year Memorandum of Understanding, making it the single largest recipient of US foreign assistance. US-supplied F-16s, Apache helicopters, and bunker-buster bombs have been used in Lebanon, the West Bank, and Gaza. As Amnesty International has documented, each major assault on Gaza, 2008, 2014, 2021, 2023, was carried out with American weapons. At the United Nations, the US became Israel's shield. From 1972 to 2022, the United States used its veto power 53 times to block resolutions critical of Israel. No other country has been protected in this way. This diplomatic cover ensured that apartheid, occupation, and now genocide continued without sanctions. Domestically, organizations like AIPAC and newer groups like Christians United for Israel ensured bipartisan loyalty. Congressional candidates routinely declared support for Israel as a litmus test. Campaign donations, political pressure, and media influence have locked Washington into alignment. Joe Biden once said,
"If there were not an Israel, we would have to invent one."
This statement captures not only US loyalty, but also how Israel is viewed as an extension of American strategic identity. The ties run deeper than money or strategy. Both Israel and the United States are settler colonial states. Both were founded on the displacement of indigenous populations. Both justify conquest through exceptionalism. America's manifest destiny and Israel's promised land. As historian Rashid Khalidi wrote,
"The United States and Israel are settler colonial states whose special relationship is cemented by a shared sense of exceptionalism and frontier violence."
In 2025, as the UN Commission of Inquiry concludes that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza, American weapons continue to flow. American vetoes continue to shield Israel from sanctions. The alliance is not peripheral, it is central. Without the United States, Israel's occupation and apartheid system could not endure. The US and Israel alliance is more than geopolitics. It is a pact of supremacy, defended abroad, justified at home, and financed by billions of dollars from American taxpayers. The US-Israel alliance is not only about strategy, aid, or lobbying. It is also about religion. For centuries, strands of Protestant theology, especially among evangelicals in Britain and the United States, interpreted the return of Jews to the Holy Land as the fulfillment of biblical prophecy. By the 19th century, this belief was known as Christian Zionism. It was not born out of love for Jews, but out of a theological script. Jews must return to Palestine so that Christ can return, the rapture can occur, and in the end times, Jews themselves must either convert or perish. Lord Balfour himself was influenced by these currents, shaped by the evangelical circles in Britain. In the United States, Christian Zionism became mainstream in the 20th century. Preachers like Jerry Falwell, Pat Robertson, and later John Hagee mobilized millions of evangelicals around unconditional support for Israel. In 2006, Pastor John Hagee founded Christians United for Israel. Today, it claims more than 10 million members, making it the largest pro-Israel organization in the US, even larger than AIPAC. Kufi conferences are attended by US presidents, senators, and Israeli leaders alike. The logic is stark. Unconditional support for Israel is preached from the pulpits as divine mandate. Politicians who challenge it risk alienating a voting bloc that can swing elections. As Israeli journalist Gideon Levy put it,
"The strongest support for Israel in the world does not come from the Jewish diaspora, but from American evangelicals."
this theology fuels policy. US recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital under Donald Trump in 2017 was celebrated most loudly by Christian Zionists. The move was seen as bringing prophecy one step closer to fulfillment. Christian Zionism shows that Israel's power is not only military or diplomatic. It is also spiritual, rooted in an apocalyptic worldview embraced by tens of millions. The irony is devastating. A theology that predicts the destruction or conversion of Jews has become one of the greatest pillars of Zionism. For Palestinians, it means their dispossession is sanctified twice over. Once by Zionism and again by Christian Zionism. Nowhere shows the continuity of Zionism's settler colonial project more starkly than Gaza. After the Nakba of 1948, Gaza's population swelled overnight. Hundreds of thousands of refugees expelled from their villages were forced into this tiny strip of land along the Mediterranean. By 1950, over 200,000 Palestinians were crammed into a space barely 25 miles long and 5 miles wide, one of the densest places on Earth. Before October 7, 2023, Gaza was home to over 2.3 million people. Nearly 70% were refugees or descendants of refugees from 1948. Around half were children under 18. More than 80% relied on humanitarian aid to survive. Israel captured Gaza in 1967, and even after the so-called disengagement of 2005, it maintained full control of airspace, borders, sea, and resources. The UN and human rights groups began calling Gaza an open-air prison. Former UK Prime Minister David Cameron used the phrase in 2010. Others, including South African leaders, have compared it to a concentration camp. Year after year, Gaza was bombarded. 2008 to 2009, Operation Cast Lead, 1,400 Palestinians killed. 2014, Operation Protective Edge, over 2,200 killed in 50 days. 2021, residential towers leveled. 2023 onward, destruction on a scale not seen since World War II. Israeli strategists gave this cycle a name, mowing the lawn. The idea was to strike Gaza every few years, killing fighters and civilians alike, destroying infrastructure, and then letting life regrow, only to cut it down again. Gaza was not treated as a society with rights, but as a patch of grass to be periodically trimmed. As one Israeli minister boasted,
Gaza should look just like Rafah, which we turned into a pile of rubble.
today the devastation in Gaza is undeniable. A UN Commission of Inquiry concluded there are reasonable grounds to believe Israel is committing a genocide in Gaza, killing, inflicting serious harm, destroying the conditions of life, and preventing births. This is Gaza today. A place of forced concentration since 1948, an open-air prison since 2007, mowed repeatedly under military doctrine, and in the words of the UN itself, the site of an unfolding genocide. Many believe this story begins on October the 7th, 2023. But October the 7th did not happen in a vacuum. For Palestinians, it came after 75 years of dispossession, 56 years of military occupation, 16 years of blockade in Gaza, and countless wars. When Palestinian fighters broke through the fence on that day, it was a shocking rupture for Israel. But it was also a desperate response to systematic oppression. To a life where freedom of movement, access to water, electricity, even the right to build a home are denied. Israel's response was immediate and devastating. The mass bombardment of Gaza, entire neighborhoods reduced to ash, and today, as the UN Commission has concluded, an unfolding genocide. As the South African Foreign Minister Naledi Pandor said,
October 7th did not happen in a vacuum. It was born of a history of oppression and of a people denied their right to self-determination.
This does not erase what happened on October the 7th, but it explains why October the 7th was not the beginning. It was a symptom, a breaking point in a cycle of violence rooted in settler colonialism, apartheid, and supremacy without borders. Zionism began as a promise of refuge, but became a project of displacement. From Herzl's vision to the Nakba, from occupied Jerusalem to the rubble of Gaza, from the fence on October the 7th to the genocide unfolding today. The arc is clear. Supremacy is never confined. It travels borders, borrows methods, and leaves ruins in its wake. Zionism is one such project, and Gaza is its front line. And this is only part of the story. In the next episode of Supremacy Without Borders, we look at how Zionism's methods inspired and converged with another supremacist ideology, Hindutva in India. The echoes are impossible to ignore.